Before the public meeting begins, I would like to advise the public of the following. This is a meeting to host public meetings on matters requiring approval under the Planning Act. During the meeting, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers from committee and the public. Before we begin, members of the public are advised that if a person or public body does not make oral submission at the public meeting or make written submission to the Corporation of the Municipality of Central Elgin before the decision, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the Council of the Corporation of the Municipality of Central Elgin to the local planning appeal tribunal. Further, if a person or public body does not make oral submission at the public meeting or make written submission to the Corporation of the Municipality of Central Elgin before the decision, the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the local planning appeal tribunal unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to do so. Those wanting to be notified of council's decision on any application should email Diane Wilson at dwilson@centralelgin.org, indicating which meeting they wish to be notified on and providing their name and address. Those who do not have access to a computer and wish to be notified should call Diane Wilson at 519-631-4860, extension 286, and provide the same information. We'll call this meeting to order. This is a public hearing as required by the Planning Act to hear the applicant Charlie Bailey and every other person who desires to be heard in favor of or against the application for a minor variance from the zoning bylaw respecting 45145 Edgeware Line. Does any member of the committee have a disclosure of interest concerning this application? And I'm seeing none. If the applicant or agent is listening on your computer, tablet, or smartphone, please click the raise hand icon. And if you have called into the meeting using a telephone, please dial *9. We will acknowledge your raised hand and you will unmute to explain the application. So is Mr. Bailey online or his agent?
This is Jeff Roberts.
Mr. Roberts, you're free to go ahead and explain the need for the application.
You want me to explain what's happening?
Yes,
basically?
Please.
A porch is going on the front of the house. After a fire, the house is being rebuilt. It's basically the same as what was there before, just the width of the house. It goes out the same amount towards the road as the original steps were. It's just a porch now.
Okay, thank you. What method of notice and when was notice given to the public of the hearing?
Madam Chair, as per requirements of the Planning Act, notice was mailed by regular post to every owner of land within 60 meters of the subject land and applicable agencies on September the 15th, 2021. Notice was physically posted to the property by municipal staff as well as the municipal website, and notice was displayed in the weekly CE Buzz advertisements.
Thank you. Mr. McClure, do you have any comments or questions with regards to the application?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nothing further than what was in the report.
Thank you. Do any municipal staff have any questions or comments with regard to the application? Seeing none. Have you received any written submissions on this application?
Madam Chair, no correspondence has been received.
Thank you. Do members of the committee have any questions on this application? I'm seeing none. Do we have any members of the public who have come forward, Mr. Perrin? No. If there are any members of the public listening on a computer, tablet, or smartphone, please click the raise hand icon. If you called into the meeting using a telephone, please dial *9. Your questions will be taken in sequential order. And we have nobody. Okay, everybody's been given a fair opportunity to express their views. Is the committee ready to make a decision? Yes. All those in favor of the application?
Oh, Karen, she'll have to call it because
Do you have to call the vote?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Ellen, Karen, or
Again, Mrs. Wilson, could you please call the vote?
Counselor Rowe,
yes.
Counselor Cravitz is absent. Counselor Cook,
Yes.
Counselor Fair,
Yes.
Counselor Wynn,
Yes.
Mayor Marks, Deputy Mayor Marks,
Yes.
Mayor Martin.
Yes.
Granted.
That application has been granted. Those wanting to be notified of the committee's decision on any application should email Diane Wilson at dwilson@centralelgin.org, indicating which public meeting they wish to be notified on and provide their name and address. Those who do not have access to a computer and wish to be notified should call Diane Wilson at 519-631-4860, extension 286, and provide the same information. This meeting is now adjourned.
And the next meeting will begin at 6 p.m. sharp. So
I just got a text. Dennis will be here. He's gonna be half hour late, so
I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a public meeting as required by subsection 22, 1.b and 3412 of the Planning Act to afford any person an opportunity to make representation with respect to a proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendment respecting 173 William Street. The applicant is requesting to change the land use designation, to residential and to recognize existing deficiencies in the general provisions of the residential zone R1 regulations in the Port Stanley bylaw, to allow for the conversion of the existing dwelling into a duplex. Does any member of council have a disclosure of interest concerning this proposal? Seeing none. What method of notice and when was the notice given to the public for this meeting?
Madam Chair, as per requirements of the Planning Act, notice was mailed by regular post to every owner of land within 120 meters of the subject land and applicable agencies on Friday, August the 27th, 2021. Notice was physically posted to the property by municipal staff, as well as the municipal website, and advertised in the weekly CE Buzz.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Mr. McClure, our planner, to present the proposed plan amendment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll just share my screen. As has been indicated, this is a public meeting to present the draft official plan and zoning bylaw amendments for 173 William Street. As can be seen on the screen, the subject lands are located on the east side of William Street, north of Erie, south of Smith Street. And I'll move on to the draft amendment. As has been indicated, the official plan amendment is required as the land use designation currently on the property is commercial. The applicant is requesting to change it to residential to convert the existing dwelling that's on the property into a duplex. So this can be seen as the location plan in the official plan amendment, again with the location of the property located where my cursor is on the screen within the Port Stanley harbor area. And then this brings us to the details of the amendment itself. Item 1 of the amendment introduces a new Schedule G to the Community of Port Stanley Land Use Plan, which is part of the Central Elgin Official Plan. What it's doing is replacing or deleting and replacing Schedule G with a new Schedule G, as shown on Schedule I attached to the official plan amendment, and forms part of what will be official plan amendment number 10. That redesignates the lands from commercial to residential, and then provides for the implementation and interpretation of that new schedule in accordance with all the relative policies in the Municipality of Central Elgin Official Plan. So as can be seen here, the location is currently commercial, which is this red. It will be changed to yellow, which is residential, through the amendment to the plan. This then brings us to the draft zoning bylaw amendment for the subject lands. It will be converted from what is now a business use or business zone to a site-specific R1-90 zone that allows for the site-specific duplex use. The amendment itself, part 1 of the amendment, amends the Port Stanley bylaw by including Schedule A to the bylaw, and designating such or identifying that schedule as map part 1 BZ. Part 2 of the amendment then designates the area highlighted on heavy solid lines on Schedule A as R1-90, and provides for the specific provisions of the R1 zone to apply to the subject lands. So as can be seen here, the lands on William Street being R1-90. And then part 4 of the amendment introduces a new subsection to the residential section of the Port Stanley bylaw, being subsection 9.2.2.90, defines the area shown on zoning map part 2BZ as R1-90, provides for permitted buildings and structures being duplex dwelling, accessory buildings and structures. The current property is deficient in lot depth, so that was going to be addressed, this amendment being 21 meters. And then provides for locations of permitted building and structures being the location of any building and other structures that remain as they lawfully exist on the day of the passing of the bylaw. This is to recognize the specific location of the building and the porch that's on the building, recognizing its existing location, as my understanding that the applicant is looking to reconstruct the porch and do some exterior renovations to the building. And this will recognize the current deficiencies to the R1 zone, their general provisions. But it also does recognize through sub B that any accessory buildings or enlargements or extensions of buildings and other structures that are permitted under the provisions of this zone will still need to abide by the general provisions of the R1 zone. So any future expansions or enlargements would need to abide by the general provisions. And then again, providing for the exceptions of the duplex use within this zone and for the deficient lot frontage. And then part 5 of the amendment introduces Schedule B to the Port Stanley bylaw, being zoning map 1 to bylaw 1507, which includes all the changes that have been made to such zoning map by previous amendments and including this amendment, which can be seen here. And again, the actual location is on where my cursor is on the screen right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McClure. Have you received any written submissions on the proposal, Mrs. Wilson?
Madam Mayor, correspondence has been received from Kettle Creek Conservation Authority stating no objections and advising that the subject property is located outside of the Lake Erie flood uprush hazards. Correspondence has also been received from Ann Waz, 156 Maud Street, expressing support for the application and the duplex conversion.
Thank you. We will now open the meeting to questions from the public. For those attending who've not already submitted their concerns or comments to the municipality. If you are listening on your computer, tablet, or smartphone, please click the raise hand icon. And if you've called into the meeting using a telephone, please dial *9. The questions will be taken in a sequential order. When given the opportunity to speak, please provide your name and address for the record. This meeting is now open to the public. Mr. Perrin, is there any? No raised hands? I'll ask once again. Make sure you raise your hand or dial *9. Do any members of council have any questions on this? Seeing none, everyone has been given a fair opportunity to be heard. If there are no further questions, please be advised that any person wishing further information on the actions of council regarding the passing of a bylaw on the proposed amendment should email Diane Wilson at dwilson@centralelgin.org, indicating which public meeting they wish to be notified on and providing their name and address. Those who do not have access to a computer and wish to be notified should call Diane Wilson at 519-631-4860, extension 286, and provide the same information. This public meeting is now concluded. Any amendment to the bylaw will be considered at a future meeting of council. The next meeting will be at 6:15. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a public meeting as required by subsection 22(1)(b) and 34(12) of the Planning Act to afford any person an opportunity to make representation with respect to a proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendment respecting 400 Sunset Drive. The applicants are looking to convert the existing vacant building on the property into a restaurant and to allow a future patio. The current designation and zoning do not permit the requested use, which is facilitating the need for an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment. Does any member of council have a disclosure of interest concerning this proposal? Seeing and hearing none. What method of notice and when was the notice given to the public for this meeting?
Madam Mayor, as per requirements of the Planning Act, notice was mailed by regular post to every owner of land within 120 meters of the subject land and applicable agencies on Friday, August the 27th. Notice was physically posted to the property by municipal staff, as well as the municipal website, and advertised in the Weekly Sea Buzz.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Mr. McClure, our planner now, to explain the bylaw amendment, zoning amendment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll just share my screen. So what is on screen is the draft presentation, or the presentation for the draft official plan and zoning bylaw amendments for 400 Sunset Drive. As can be seen on the screen, the subject lands are highlighted in yellow just north of the county and municipal administrative building just on Karen and across from the St. Thomas Forensic Center. The draft official plan amendment is required as the office professional designation does not permit a restaurant use as a primary use. Currently, there is zoning on the property that recognizes a restaurant use within a very small footprint. Is my understanding that was prepared a number of years ago to deal with a cafeteria situation on the property. Just of note, there's an existing Winmar operation kind of around where my cursor is right now. The location of the building that's going to be used as the restaurant is just north of that kind of I guess angular building that you see from Sunset. So again, this is the location plan that is to be in the amendment itself. And then this brings us to the details of the amendment. So item 1 of the amendment introduces Schedule I to the amendment and encloses the area in heavy solid lines, defines them as the subject lands, and then amends Schedule E, Community of Norman Lindale Land Use Plan in the Municipality of Central Elgin Official Plan by permitting an exception in the policies of the official plan for office professional. So as again can be seen here, this area in red is all the office professional designation, and the area that is going to have the exception is highlighted in the inlay here. This brings us to item 2 of the official plan amendment, providing that a new subsection in the official plan under the office professional policies introduces a new subsection after 4.3.3 G and before 4.3.4 being 4.3.3.1, which provides the exception for 400 Sunset Drive, identifies them as 400 Sunset Drive and describes them as being concession 6 part of lots 3 west side of Highway 4, may include an approximately 350 square meter restaurant and accessory outdoor patio as a primary use. The office professional designation does not permit restaurants and retail uses as a primary use. This would be that exception, and then provides through sub 3 through the implementation and interpretation that all of the respective policies of the official plan when dealing with these lands still need to be adhered to, noting this exception. So then the draft bylaw amendment itself is required as there is an existing zoning on the property. So what this will be doing is repealing the site-specific nature of the previous zone and then reintroducing more or less the entirety of of what was there previously, but allowing for the specific changes to the restaurant use and the patio that's required or is requested for a future date. So what this will do is part one of the amendment will repeal bylaw number 1949. And then part two will then introduce Schedule A to the bylaw amendment, being map part 6N, provide that the open space zone 1, this is again a carryover from the previous amendment. It was not, I guess sections of the lands weren't in open space, so it's just carrying over what that open space 1 zone designation is. And then it outlines the area and heavy solid lines on Schedule A as part of that B4 zone, but specifically the B4-16, which is the exception for the property. So as can be seen here, again, that area highlighted previously is now that B4-16. Part 4 of the amendment then essentially is reintroducing the special provisions in 10.5.2.16, being the area shown as B4-16 on zoning map part 6N, provides for the only permitted uses being business office, restricted business office, institutional use, personal service shop, restaurant, and fitness center. Those are currently what's in the zone, but this is again reintroducing it because of the repealing of the previous zone. Then provides for the only buildings, permitted buildings and structures being buildings and structures existing at the time of the passing of the bylaw. Again, this is carried forward from the previous site-specific zoning on the property, but then provides for an accessory patio to a permitted restaurant use. So this is acknowledging that a patio, an accessory patio would be permitted to a restaurant. Provides for the maximum floor area of a permitted restaurant being, so the maximum floor area for restaurant permitted by the previous subsection shall be 350 square meters. Again, the previous or the current zoning on the property has a much smaller restaurant use, so this is just expanding it to be able to fit within that building footprint. And then sub B provides that notwithstanding this site-specific exception for that, an accessory patio will be permitted as a restaurant use, shall not be included in the floor area calculation for a restaurant. So just for the time of implementation through building code, if there's a patio to be constructed, that 350 meters or the patio will not be counted as part of that 350 meters. And then the maintenance building, the former maintenance building existing at the time of passing the bylaw may be used for property restoration business subject to the following: no outdoor storage or equipment or supplies is permitted. Again, recognizing the Winmar operation, and it's a carryover from the previous amendment. Part 5 of the amendment then introduces Schedule B to the Yarmouth bylaw, being zoning map 6, which again provides for all the changes that have included, occurred over the number of years to zoning map 6, including those made by this proposed amendment, as can be seen here. And again, with the area shown where my cursor is on the screen at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McClure. Mrs. Wilson, have we received any written submissions on the proposal?
Madam Mayor, correspondence has been received from Rebecca Capagianis, 315 Sunset Drive, citing community benefit and voicing support for the application. Correspondence has been received from Kettle Creek Conservation Authority, stating no objections and advising that a portion of the property is affected by KCCA regulations. Correspondence has been received from a resident of Marlene Street, voicing concern that designation will have a detrimental effect on the aesthetics of the community. They also are concerned with increase in traffic on an already busy street and excessive noise.
Thank you. We will now open the meeting to questions from the public. For those attending who have not already submitted their concerns or comments to the municipality. If you're listening on your computer, tablet, or smartphone, please click the raise hand icon. And if you've called into the meeting using a telephone, please dial *9. The questions will be taken in a sequential order. When given the opportunity to speak, please provide your name and address for the record. The meeting is now open to the public. Let's see, we have one hand. Mr. Campbell, go ahead, please. State your name and address.
Good evening, Madam Mayor. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So again, my name is Matt Campbell with Zelenka Preamble Limited here on behalf of the applicant. I don't have much to add to Mr. McClure's presentation, only that this area has been historically underutilized, and we believe this proposed restaurant use is an excellent use for this area. We're very excited to see this coming forward, and we've reviewed the draft bylaw. I had a discussion with Mr. McClure this earlier today, and we're certainly supportive of the bylaw and happy to answer any questions that that council or any member of the public may have regarding this application and future use of the property.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Mr. Perrin, are there no other participants raising hands? No. Oh, once again, is there any member of the public? You need to click the raise hand icon or *9 on your telephone. Seeing none, do any members of council have any questions? Okay, everyone has been given a fair opportunity to be heard. If there are no further questions, please be advised that any person wishing further information on the actions of council regarding the passing of a bylaw on the proposed amendment should email Diane Wilson at dwilson@centralalgon.org, indicating which public meeting they wish to be notified on and providing their name and address. Those who do not have an access to a computer and wish to be notified should call Diane Wilson at 519-631-4860, extension 286, and provide the same information. This meeting is now concluded. Any amendment to the bylaw will be considered at a future meeting of council. The next meeting is at 6:30, so it should be shortly. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a public meeting as required by subsection 5120A and 3412 of the Planning Act to afford any person an opportunity to make representation with respect to a proposed plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment respecting lands located west of Snyder's Ave and south of 7th Ave in the community of Belmont. A statutory public meeting was held on October the 28th, 2019, and the application has now been revised. Does any member of council have a disclosure of interest concerning this proposal? Seeing none, what method of notice and when was the notice given to the public for this meeting?
Madam Mayor, as per requirements of the Planning Act, notice was mailed by regular post to every owner of land within 120 meters of the subject land and applicable agencies on Friday, August the 31st. Notice was physically posted to the property by municipal staff as well as the municipal website, and notice was advertised in the weekly CE Buzz, St. Thomas Times Journal, and the Elmer Express on September the 1st.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Mr. McClure, our planner now, to present the proposed plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll just share my screen. So again, this is a public meeting for a revised draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment for Belmont Estates Phase 6. As you can see on the screen in the yellow lines, the subject lands are south of 7th Avenue, west of Snyder's Avenue. The lands are designated within the community of Belmont in the official plan as residential, with agricultural and natural heritage lands to the west outside of the settlement area. And what this is a revision based on the comments received at the previous public meeting, but also with the applicant working with the Thames Valley District School Board on the acquisition of a block of land for a school in Belmont. As part of the draft plan of subdivision, revisions have been made that now are providing for 158 single attached lots, 17 semi-detached lots or 34 units, 4 townhouse blocks for 16 units, a school/residential block, block 183, a stormwater block at block 184, and some future roads, walkways, and reserves. So just of note, as part of the discussions, the applicant currently is going forward with a block up here in my screen, being block 183. They have proposed a school/residential zone on the, or institutional/residential zone in the bylaw, which I'll get to later. As you may be aware, staff has recommended that the block itself go forward with just a straight institutional zone based on our discussions with Thames Valley District School Board, and the fact that any subsequent or potential subdivision of this block or proposal would require some other Planning Act approvals. So should any sort of development between the applicant and the Thames Valley District School Board not go forward, there are the appropriate mechanisms in place to deal with this block. As part of that, again, where my cursor is coming in on the new street off of 7th Ave, these are the location of the proposed townhouses. The semi-detached are typically up here along this area to the south of the proposed school block/residential block. The remainder of the lands are to be single detached, and the stormwater management block is at the southern portion of the plan of subdivision. This brings us to the draft zoning bylaw amendment itself, which introduces the R1-14 zone for the majority of the lands, that again being the single and semi-detached. There's a separate R1-15 zone, which will be a little the same as the R1-14 essentially, but it's how we're dealing with the dual zone nature of that residential block, and I'll note that. The R2-2 speaks specifically to the townhouse, with the I2 being the institutional to deal with the school, and then the OS3-3 being the stormwater management block. So this brings us to the amendment itself, being part 1 of the amendment, introducing new Schedule A-21 to the Belmont bylaw. It designates the area in heavy solid lines on Schedule 1 being R1-14. It zones the lands and hatch lines on Schedule 1 as R2-2, again being the townhouses. And by zoning the lands shown in crosshatch lines as I-2 and R1-15. Again, this being that dual zone. And then showing the area shown in shaded on Schedule 1 as OS-3. So again, this is again showing the balance of the majority of the land being zoned for that single detached, semi-detached use, townhouse blocks, the dual zone approach that's been suggested by the applicant, and then the OS-3. So this brings us to part 2 of the amendment, which adds a new subsection to the single residential provisions of the Belmont bylaw, being subsection 5.2.5.14, identifies the area affected as the area shown on Schedule A-21 as R1-14, provides for an additional permitted use being semi-detached dwelling, as the zone already prevents single detached. Provides a minimum lot area of 380 square meters for single detached and 250 square meters for semi-detached. Provides for minimum lot frontage of 12 meters for single detached and 9 meters per unit for semi-detached. Provides a minimum front yard setback of 6 meters. Provides for a minimum side yard setback for an interior side yard of 1 meter, except where a common vertical wall separates one dwelling unit from an adjoining dwelling unit. That's no side yard, so that's only relevant where there's a semi-detached dwelling. And then exterior side yard of 3.5 meters. It provides for a minimum rear yard of 7.5 meters, has a maximum lot coverage of 50%, permitted deck encroachments of 5 meters. So this is deck encroachments, typically what we see at the rear of properties. It allows it to encroach into the rear yard of 5 meters. And then provides for a holding zone for the R1-14, again, for the ensuring of the entering into a subdivision agreement, and also demonstration that there's a sewage capacity for those lands. And then obviously interim permitted uses being existing uses. This brings us to part 3 then, that introduces the 5.2.5.15, which is that R1-15 on Schedule A-21. So this is the exact same provisions within the zone, except it's being applied again for that dual zone block to recognize the dual zone nature that the applicant is looking to have on the property. So again, provides for additional permitted use being semi-detached dwelling, provides for minimum lot area of 380 square meters for single detached and 250 square meters for semi-detached, minimum lot frontage of 12 meters for single detached and 9 meters for semi-detached, minimum front yard being 6 meters, minimum side yard being interior side yard of 1 meter, except where there's that common wall between the semi-detached units, where in that case, there's no side yard required, exterior side yard of 3.5 meters, minimum rear yard of 7.5 meters, maximum lot coverage of 50%, and again, the deck permitted deck encroachments of 5 meters. And then the same holding provision for ensuring that they entering into a kind of a subdivision agreement with the municipality, and that there's a confirmation of reserve sewage capacity for the development, and then interim permitted uses. And then this part 4 of the amendment introduces a new subsection to the single residential zone, the R2 subsection, being the 5.3.5.2, provides that the affected area is the area identified on Schedule A-21 as the R2-2, provides that additional permitted uses are townhouse dwelling, provides that the minimum lot area is 200 square meters per dwelling unit, and that the minimum lot frontage for a townhouse is 9 meters. Provides for a minimum front yard setback of 6 meters, and then provides for a minimum side yard setback being an interior side yard of 1 meter, except for no side yard requirement where townhouse dwelling units share a common wall. So it's similar to the semi-detached provisions. Provides for exterior side yard of 3.5 meters and a minimum rear yard of 7.5 meters. Maximum lot coverage of 50%, and then again, a permitted deck encroachment of 5 meters. There's a special provision within this section of the zone for parking within a front yard. Typically, and it's been a practice that we're not supportive of over 50% driveway coverage within zones. However, as part of this bylaw amendment process and through the report and the justification, staff were satisfied that by introducing, I guess, a new building form in this area, and also its location on the street where it's across from single detached and where there's typically less driveway coverage, that we were satisfied that it wouldn't create a parking or off-street parking issue, and they would provide for a decent amount of landscaping opportunities along that stretch of the road. So we were satisfied that in this instance, a 65% driveway coverage would be okay for these units. Front lot line. In all such cases, the front line shall be the lot line fronting on a street oriented north-south. So the reason why this provision was put in there is that when you're dealing with lots, it's usually the shortest front, I guess the shortest side fronting a street is considered a front yard. In this instance, until they're subdivided, which happens after the units are, I guess, developed or built, and then surveys done along property lines, the zoning bylaw would not be aligned. So this is just ensuring that for building permit processes that we're able to issue building permits because they meet the zone. And then the holding provision, similar to the previous residential zones, is that there's an entering into a subdivision agreement for the orderly development of the lands, and that there's a demonstration that there's reserved sewage capacity for the development of those properties. Part 5 of the amendment then introduces a new section to the institutional section of the bylaw, being 8.1.6.2, shows that the area on Schedule A-21 is being I-2, provides for the permitted uses as being an institutional and accessory uses to the foregoing. Permitting buildings and structures are a school and uses buildings and structures accessory to the foregoing permitted use. Provides for a minimum front yard of 20 meters, a minimum side yard of 6 meters, and a minimum rear yard of 6 meters. Maximum lot coverage of 50%, maximum building height of 12 meters, and parking being 3 spaces plus 2 spaces per classroom. There is not, I guess there isn't a holding provision in this specific, for this specific use, given that the use itself would be required to go through site plan and site plan approval, where the municipality would be able to ensure that those other aspects that were identified as part of development agreements and servicing would be able to address through that process. So we didn't feel that it was needed to be part of the zoning bylaw amendment. And then the final is the 9.1.5.2, which is the OS-3, which is dealing with the stormwater management component of the plan of subdivision, being that OS-3 shown on Schedule A-21, where it again goes back and allows for all the provisions of the open space zone, which goes to conservation uses and essentially stormwater uses that we would typically use in plans of subdivision. And then Part 7 of the amendment, in anticipation of the eventual consolidation of bylaw 9121, introduces Schedule 2 to the amendment, being Schedule B to bylaw 9121, where it provides for the consolidated version of all the amendments that have occurred on Schedule 2 to date, including this amendment, as can be seen here. And again, where my cursor is, all the zones that are currently shown or required through this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McClure. Mrs. Wilson, what method of notice and when was notice given to the public for this meeting? I'm sorry, I apologize. Have you received any written submissions on the proposal?
Madam Mayor, correspondence has been received from Thames Valley District School Board noting it received approval from the Ministry of Education in June of 2020 for the purpose of constructing a 354 pupil elementary school in Belmont. The correspondence confirms their intent to acquire block 183, need a school block within the development, and to negotiate an agreement of purchase and sale with Craig Home Estates to begin construction of a new school in Belmont. Correspondence has been received from Sean O'Brien, 147 Windsor Court, opposing the proposed development for the following reasons. No area marked for new school, which is needed in Belmont, wants new subdivision to mirror others in Belmont with larger lots, less density, and he requests a reduction in the number of lots approved. Concerns for quality of life and suggests that if new subdivision does not have space for a new school, it should be required to incorporate a park, dog park, or children's playground into the design. Said correspondence has been circulated to council and municipal staff.
Thank you. We'll now open the meeting to questions from the public. For those attending who have not already submitted their concerns or comments to the municipality. If you're listening on your computer, tablet, or smartphone, please click the raise hand icon. And if you've called into the meeting using a telephone, please dial *9. The questions will be taken in a sequential order. When given the opportunity to speak, please provide your name and address for the record. The meeting is now open to the public. I see Barb Rosser, who's the planner for Craig Home Estates. Barb, you'd like to speak. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'm just trying to turn my camera on, but I guess I don't have that option right now. Yes, I am the planning consultant for Craig Home Estates. And I'm also their agent for the purposes of these applications for plan of subdivision approval and rezoning. Also present tonight is Joe Snyders of Craig Home Estates and Kevin Monaz of SBM, which is the engineering firm for this project. I'll try to keep my comments brief. We have reviewed the report that went to council from staff of August the 16th, 2021. And concur with the opinions expressed that the proposed development would be consistent with the provincial policy statement and in conformity with the county and the Central Elgin official plans. We really have very few points of disagreement. I would, with regard to the proposed bylaw, I would just like to point out that the R2-2 regulation that Mr. McClure mentioned with regard to 65% front yard coverage for parking, we did, as he indicated, consult with staff on that. And one of the motivators for Craig Home was that it has a requirement for double car garages for all of the houses in the prior phases and intends to have to ensure that double laneways are required for all development within this 6th phase. And so the 65%, while it is also, it's achievable because of the location of these street townhouse blocks and the size of the blocks, it's also, it will also assist Craig Home in ensuring that there are double laneways for each of the street townhouse units. As I mentioned, the only point of difference is the zoning of the school block. That's block 183. Craig Home proposed a dual zoning that would be would permit low density residential development and institutional development. The objective of Craig Home was to ensure that should the school purchase, should the TVDSB acquisition of the school block not proceed, that the development that would take place in lieu of the school would be compatible with existing development, prior development to the east. So what it's proposing is a zoning for the dual zoning that is basically identical to what would apply with the rest of the subdivision and would be permissive of single detached development and semi-detached development. This is something that was, the the subject originated, I guess, in very early consultation with municipal staff. And it was vetted in early 2020 with the TVDSB, which has been consistent throughout in having no opposition to the dual zoning. There's no concerns at all. And that has been repeatedly expressed to both myself and to staff. And I would point out that there has been correspondence, which was read at the start of this meeting from the board, but that correspondence, while indicating its intent to acquire the lands, clearly indicates that it's subject to approval for the purchase of the site from the Ministry of Education. So the board has been consistent in that respect in the most recent correspondence and in prior correspondence. It was indicated by staff that there would be Planning Act approvals required for the school block should the board not acquire the site and not construct a school. And that is correct. If there's going to be a planned subdivision on the lands, which would be required to advance development, then there would be further involvement for the public, and certainly staff would be involved every step of the way. So the dual zoning does not detract from that. It just ensures that should the purchase not go ahead, if the Ministry of Education approval does not happen, then there would be a zoning in effect that would allow Craig Home to go ahead without having to and essentially establish what residential use would be appropriate for the school block. All of the supporting studies that Craig Home submitted with this revision considered the dual zoning where it was appropriate. And those included the traffic impact study and the servicing studies that were done. So there was specific regard to that block and to ensure that there was adequate servicing to provide for both the school block or a low density residential block. And the same holds true for traffic impact, because of course schools have fairly specific requirements for buses coming and going and other traffic, but as well, there would be some traffic that would be generated from a low density residential development should the school not proceed to acquire the site. So we're hoping that council and the public will understand why the dual zoning is being proposed. I had a discussion with staff this afternoon to the effect that if for some reason the acquisition doesn't take place, that then there would be, Craig Home would talk to staff and would say, well, the board says they're not going to acquire it, so we want to proceed with a submission of a draft plan subdivision for that. It's a Planning Act process. Staff would be involved, the neighbors would be involved, similar to any other Planning Act application. So really that's the extent of our comments at the current time. These are lands that have been designated since 1997 under the Belmont official plan. So that's essentially 25 years ago. In the intervening time, Craig Home has been occupied with the development of its prior 5 phases. And we're hoping that council support of the rezoning and draft plan will allow this proposal to go ahead and not experience delays with regard to a disagreement on what is really, we believe, a fairly minor issue relative to the school block zoning. And we don't see that there's any downside to the municipality. So the board, the Thames Valley Board agrees, and we're hoping that we'll get support from council. And thank you very much.
Can we get council unmuted?
Thank you, Bill. I apologize. We were muted. And so there were no other questions from the public, but Councillor Wynn has now been given permission to make comments.
Again.
Sorry.
Yes, so I have to say that in talking with Mrs. Rosser, in hearing comments recently from parents who have been speaking with trustees, I completely understand why the developer is asking for the dual zoning. There just always seems to be something with the school. And this property, again, it's been designated, did I get that wrong? That it's been designated, those lands, since 1997. I mean, this school, the board brought this issue of Belmont needing a school when my 23-year-old son was 2. That's when it first came to my attention. It was the board who brought it. And it's 2021, and that 2-year-old is now 23. And we're still here with this. So I can understand why someone whose investment is being held up would say, why can't we have the dual zoning? If the board's ready to go ahead, doesn't matter. They can get shovels in the ground, that school's going to be built. But if there's going to be more delays, like the ministry still has to approve the purchase of the land, which that hasn't happened. And there's an election next year, a provincial election next year. So we could have a whole new government and be in this all over again. So for me, I could see the dual zoning gets this done and gets things moving. And I understand why the developer would be asking for us to consider it and grant it.
Thank you.
I'm done.
Councillor Rowe, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It was merely a question of, yes, perhaps things have been taking a long time to get to this stage, but given the zoning as it's proposed, is there a time frame around which the TBDSB and Craigholm together will be able to come up with some plan? Because I guess I would hate to have one side or the other not negotiating as expected, I suppose, and then all of a sudden it becomes residential. So I just don't know how that all works. And I think somehow, if it's possible, we should be able to put some kind of a time frame around this to keep that negotiation going.
Thank you. Obviously, we're not making a decision at this time. Councillor Kravitz.
With this plan of subdivision in the zoning bylaw, I'd hate to see the developer have to come back in 3 years and have to do this process all over again for that block right now. I don't see the issue with doing a dual zone for that zoning bylaw amendment. I don't know, is there an issue with sewage capacity? Would that ever, I don't know if somebody can answer that. If it was developed as residential, would that hurt the sewage allotment where a school would not be able to be built? Does anybody know our sewage allotment for Belmont?
Mr. Perrin?
The servicing capacity is irrelevant whether it's residential use or institutional use.
Okay, but seeing that if it was developed as residential, could it jeopardize a school being built at a different location for servicing?
Potentially, yes.
Yeah, and I do want to reiterate the letter that Diane circulated to all of us from the Thames Valley Board saying they definitely are going to purchase this. They're just negotiating with Craigholm because they have been given ministry approval for this. I don't know whether they've been given approval for the amount of money, but I know that they gave approval. We announced it. Councillor Wynn and I were both present when Mr. Urick announced it, that it was a go. So anyway, any other questions that anyone has?
Yeah.
Councillor Kravitz.
And just Mr. McClure, to put the dual zone on that area, what's the issues with doing that as the developer is asking? Why, I'm looking for an answer why we're looking at a single institutional rather than the dual zone as the developer is requesting. Some response, please.
Go ahead, Mr. McClure.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to Councillor Krevitz. Just to put it into context, the plan of subdivision that's currently before us has a block on it that's been, I guess, justified through the planning reports and background studies. While I guess there were two scenarios put forward through the planning justification, and the traffic study did speak to a potential ability for there to be, I guess, two cul-de-sacs coming off of 7th Ave. The planning justification and staff's report was based on the block that's been proposed as part of this plan that's presented today, and essentially the analysis was based on that. Further, I know that going through the discussions and having discussions with the Thames Valley District School Board, it seems like they're very, I guess, eager to get moving along with the process itself. The correspondence that's been received by the municipality and by staff seems to indicate that in all accounts, they're looking forward and hope to move with this expeditiously. And ultimately, you would have a zoning on the property that would still be subject to some sort of Planning Act approval in the future. So a future Planning Act process would be required to deal with the subdivision of the block, albeit through a plan of subdivision or some sort of higher density sort of development, if that was the way. It's not proposed that way. But again, you would be looking at the block and having to go through a Planning Act process. So similar to what we've done now, we've consolidated that process through a plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment, where I think, again, if they're going to have to go through a process anyway, that we could address the zoning at that time once the actual, what's known on the property itself. So I think the preferences right now, all accounts, is that it is a institutional block. It's being preceded as an institutional block, and should things fall apart in the future, then we can address the block at a later date.
So you're saying that even if we gave the dual, there would still have to come back with, it would still have to be addressed later anyway?
Exactly. So the block itself, even if they was to have the residential zone, they would need to go through, the applicant would need to go through a plan of subdivision, and they would need to go through a public process anyway. So given the fact that they would have to go through a public process to deal with the block, then once what is known on that, or the ultimate intent of the block is known, then we could deal with it through the zoning bylaw with the plan of subdivision or whatever the applicant was to go forward with. So I think at this point, knowing the comments that have been received by the Thames Valley District School Board, one of the big comments and pushes at the time of the original public meeting being that there is support and that there is a school block within the plan of subdivision. That's been the recommendations of staff to go forward with that school block, and would be supportive of the comments that we've heard from the TVSB and the residents at the previous public meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. I had one question, and that was about the parking for the school block, the institutional block, where you said 3 parking spaces plus 2 spaces per classroom. Can you tell me why you would have 2 spaces per classroom?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That was something that was put forward to staff as part of the negotiations and work that the Thames Valley District School Board had with the applicant through, I guess, the time since the original public meeting. It's something that I've heard from the Thames Valley District School Board. They've looked at the proposed zoning for the institutional zone, and they're satisfied that it would meet their needs, their requirements. Again, that's a minimum standard. So at least what we've seen is if they did go forward with a school block, they would be subject to site plan control. So if as part of that, we did need to have some more parking in that, that's something that we could look at, but it appears to be something that the school Thames Valley District School Board has used in the past, and they're satisfied that it meets the needs of the school.
Yeah, I wasn't looking at needing more. I was just curious that with one teacher in a classroom that you needed 2 per classroom, but Mr. Perrin?
That would, that parking requirement would take into account not only teachers, but administration staff, support staff, contractors that are coming to site, parents that are coming to pick up kids or meeting with staff. So the idea is that the parking that's required to support the institutional use is contained on site and doesn't spill over into the adjoining neighborhood.
Thank you. Councillor Wynn, you wish to speak?
I guess still having an issue with this. When Craig Holmes planner, when Mrs. Rosser had stated that they understood that it would mean having to come back, go through planning, public meeting, public input. So they're not disputing any of that. So again, I don't get the only keeping it institutional works directly for the board to keep this held for as long as they possibly want it. And again, my problem is, and that maybe it's the board and trustees aren't on the same page, but I've had conversations with parents who have said they spoke to trustees that said, this is being held up. This is going to be a legal issue. They're going to expropriate the property. So that's just not good faith dealing when that gets out into the public and a developer finds that out. So they're being told one thing and yet there's other conversations going on in the background. So again, I feel this dual zoning gets the job done. If the board is ready to go, if they can get the approval for the purchase, we know they have the approval for the purchase. They don't have the approval on the amount of money yet. So as far as I'm concerned, that still has to happen. So there are still things that can hold this up. Again, an election next year could hold this up or stop it completely. So again, I just, if there's a time limit on this that needs to be put on it, that residential only takes place once the board has said, no, we're not going to buy it, or after a certain amount of time, we would have to speak to the developers. I don't know if they would have an issue, if that would satisfy everybody. But again, I still am uncomfortable with the single zoning of institutional for it. And as much as I want this school built, I have been invested for many years. So it's not that I want to see this stop or go by the wayside. I still want this to happen. I just don't like hand tying people to get it done.
Councillor Ferry, you have your hand up.
Yes, I don't think Councillor Rowe's question was answered. I'm concerned. I hear that Thames Valley wants to move ahead with this. They're anxious and yes, but it keeps dragging on. And I'm just wondering, is there some way to put a timeline when some of this is supposed to happen, or a penalty if Thames Valley doesn't come through? Or on the other side of it, if you zone it both ways, is there some way that the builder could just say, oh, forget it, we've got 2 zoning, we'll start building right now? I'd like to know a timeline and a real commitment by Thames Valley saying we're going to do it within a year, 2 years or something, because this builder's been holding it. And I think they need to have some answers, and timeline is very significant. For government goes on forever, but a builder would probably like to know how long this is going to take. So I'd like to see if there's some sort of an answer on a timeline.
Thank you. We've had a chance now for quite a few questions and comments from council. I will go back and ask if there are any public members out there that haven't been heard and would like to be heard, because I realized I was on mute the last time. I see both Kevin McClure wants to speak and Barb Rosser. So I'm going to let Kevin, you can respond, and then I'll have Barb.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to speak to the timeframe point, once you put the zoning in place, it establishes the principle of use for the property. So once the zoning is in effect, then essentially the uses are permitted. The government hasn't enacted regulations to allow zoning with conditions. So there's nothing that would be allowed through the Planning Act that would allow for some sort of time frame that should something not occur within a certain amount of time, or should something occur within an amount of time, then certain zoning or certain changes would take place. So once the zoning is in place, it would be permitted. Yes, there would be a holding provision on the zone to deal with subdivision agreements and servicing, but the property itself, or that area itself, would allow for the residential use. I think ultimately too, what I'm understood is that the school board is looking for the block. So as part of any sort of zoning application, as a part of this plan of subdivision application, you'd be creating the block that the I guess Thames Valley District School Board could start negotiations with the applicant on, but in absence of there actually being a block to get into negotiations on. I think that's also one of the specifics that is kind of outstanding. I know that Barb has probably had more conversations with the Thames Valley District School Board and some of those specifics than I have. I have spoken to them on a number of occasions with respect to what they're hoping to do and in timeframes, but I'm not too sure if Barb would like to kind of speak to some of those points.
Thank you. Go ahead, Barb.
Thank you very much. Just a couple of points I'd like to make. There's been talk about the Thames Valley District School Board correspondence with regard to the purchase of the block. And I just want to emphasize that it is clear in the correspondence that the purchase of the site is conditional on approval for the purchase from the Minister of Education. And so it is expressing a strong desire to purchase the block, but it is clear, and they've been fair in expressing that purchase is dependent on approval from the Ministry of Education. And it has been stated earlier by Councillor Wynne, and I agree totally. There's a provincial election coming up. Let's face it, the pandemic has put a lot of stress on the provincial government. There just is no predicting whether the funding is going to be available or not. There's certainly every indication that at this point that it will, but there's a lot of uncertainty in that for Craigholme. I would just say to council and the public that eliminating the requirement for a future rezoning is very important to Craigholme. If for some reason the school's purchase of the site falls through, it would be of great importance to Craigholme to have the zoning established, the alternate zoning. And so I have to reiterate that. I also want to say, and I appreciate the comments that have been made about the time frame. And in my submission to the municipality on the zoning, I proposed a dual zoning that, and also proposed a holding provision that would stipulate that the residential part of that dual zoning would only essentially take effect it would take effect upon confirmation from the board that the site was not required for its use, or a period of time. We had suggested 2 years, which the board said was fine, and the board reviewed that holding provision. So I want to emphasize that to council. So I appreciate those comments. I agree with Mr. McClure that the block is required for negotiations to take place. There's no question about that. So I think it's very important to Craigholme and to the board that council gives support to the draft plan of subdivision, but it is also very important and of no concern to the Thames Valley Board to have a dual zoning on the school block that would allow for institutional use to meet the board's needs, and should the board not require the block, to have the zoning established. And I just want one final comment, Your Worship. Craig Home has wanted to ensure a zoning on that block that respects the existing development to the east within the prior phases of Craig Home or Belmont Estates. So what we're proposing is, again, a low density residential zoning. So hopefully that provides some clarity to council on a few points. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Perrin, is there any member of the public with a hand? No, okay. I assume we've all had our say here. There's no one else that needs to speak. Okay, if it appears that everyone has had their chance to speak now. So we've been given a fair opportunity to be heard, and if there's no further questions, please be advised that any person wishing further information on the actions of council regarding the passing of a bylaw on the proposed amendment should email Diane Wilson at dwilson@centralalgon.org, indicating which public meeting they wish to be notified on and providing their name and address. Those who do not have access to a computer and wish to be notified should call Diane Wilson at 519-631-4860 at extension 286 and provide the same information. This public meeting is now concluded. Any amendment to the bylaw will be considered at a future meeting of council. I did some